Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest on, Ella Parangau. She is known online as the Scientific Snitch. If you're not familiar with her, she has her Bachelor's of Science in Exercise Science and is currently a master's student for physiology. I don't know if it's just physiology or what that looks like. We dove into it a little bit there, but I don't know if there's anything specific that you're like studying there. But yeah, welcome to the show. Super excited to have you on and to chat today.
Thank you so much for having me. So currently I've been in a cardiology lab. So right now I've been looking at everything that has to do with the heart, but soon I'll be in a skeletal muscle lab studying some stuff about cancer, cachexia, and muscle wasting. So it'll be more so towards like my interests and stuff like that. But yeah, it's just a health and human physiology degree. So very excited.
Awesome. What do you want to do with it long term?
I want to become a researcher in the field. I knew somebody who had pancreatic cancer, cachexia, and I hope that maybe one day I can find some better treatments for it. Right now, it's just like you're firing arrows at a non-target because there's barely any target there that we know. So it's the issue with cancer is that it's hard to increase muscle growth without increasing cancer growth too. So that's like the simplest way to put it. So that's why I want to go into the field.
Interesting. Cool. Yeah. So it sounds like nothing like, I don't know, is there any fitness kind of relation there with that, or is fitness more just the hobby side of things? And then this is professionally where you would like to go long term?
I do want to one day meld hypertrophy science and a little biomedical sciences too. That's starting a lab is my dream, and being able to delve into whatever questions I want to go into it seems so fascinating to me. So I will probably in the future be going into wherever the research takes me. And I'd rather be guided by questions than guided by want to stick to this one specific topic. So I think I would say that I'm going down the right general path, but I don't know exactly where I'm aiming right now.
Yeah, just head it down and you'll hit that bullseye as you get more and more questions answered and as more and more questions come up along the way as well too.
Yeah, I already have some questions from like when I was in my bachelor's of science for kinesiology. That's exercise science, but like when I was in there, I asked a lot of questions about the literature. I wanted to learn more, so I have those in the back of my mind always, and maybe one day I'll be able to answer them.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. I'm just curious. I guess what's your background? Like, how did you get to where you're at today? What kind of led you down this path?
There was one video where this guy was talking about how veganism could cure cancer on TikTok, and from there, I guess the rest is history because I got so pissed off that I decided to make a video. Before that, I just posted random videos of me deadlifting, squatting, and benching, and to really shitty music. So that was pretty much my upbringing in social media. But I really love like communicating science. I like talking about it. I just use my platform to talk about whatever I like nerdy wise. I don't really have a specific thing. Like I know that I jump around all the time, but that's just who I am. I like science, anything that has to do with the body, really my interest.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So not really tied into one thing, really just all things health related there. But it does seem, again, I guess with your background in terms of powerlifting, stuff like that, it seems a lot of it's geared towards hypertrophy, exercise science. And again, maybe that is just partly your background there. But it seems like overall, you're saying too that you just abroad, just again, anything with the human body essentially is what you're interested in overall.
Anything with the human body, and then I guess I would say that I'm particularly interested in skeletal muscle. I love skeletal muscle, everything that has to do with it. I think it is one of the most fascinating tissues in your body, and we should know more about it, and we don't know barely anything about it. Or at least we know a lot about it. Don't give us as much credit as we should have, but we should know more. I want to know more, and I hope we can know more in the future.
It seems like there's been a lot more research recently around it, but as you're saying, it's we've learned a lot, but I feel like you said there's also still a ton that we can still learn. And again, with science, it's like you just are always coming up with more and more questions. And that's typically what we want to do with science anyways, right? It's just continue to have you find out one thing and then that leads to more questions around it and you want to dive deeper into it.
Yeah, it was only recently that I was reading up on this one study that was talking about like electrical stimulation and causing like specific, it was human muscle stem cells to grow, which I thought was so fascinating, considering that like electrical stimulation is pretty much what your brain does to your muscles when you signal it to contract. And then we also have so much other stuff about it's such a controversial term, but I guess tension or quote unquote stretch, but not really stretch. It's like tension mediated hypertrophy. So it's like we have so many different mechanisms that we don't really know exactly how they fit into the whole picture, but I hope we can one day figure it all out.
Where do you feel like that literature's at the moment? What do you think where that's going? Because again, I know initially it was like, hey, Brad Schoenfeld had his kind of research back. I don't know when that was, sometime in the what 2010, something like that, where it's like, hey, it was tension, damage, and metabolic stress. So where are we at with that at the moment?
I don't think it was ever damage. I think People who thought that muscle growth was caused by damage never actually, like, I would heavily criticize the concept of damage causing muscle growth because there is not a single cell in your body that if you puncture the cell membrane, if you damage the cell in any way, if you kill the cell off, that cell doesn't grow back bigger, it just grows back the same size. So I don't think that damage has a place in hypertrophy or ever has. It was more so a miscommunication. As far as like tension goes, it's always been like the idea that tension causes muscle growth, or at least has plays a really big role in it. And it makes sense when you think about it. Tension primarily pulls on the extracellular matrix, which is all the gooey stuff and the connective proteins that connect everything together. And that can basically do something called mechanotransduction, which is a mechanical signal. So if you want to think about it like a, if you've ever seen like one of those, what is it, like stretchy materials that have like little pores in them, when you stretch them apart, you can see the holes. It's like that, like a, I guess a good way to put it is like those self-adhesive wraps and how they activate whenever you stretch them. It's like that, where when your muscles are stretched, they pretty much activate a bunch of these different little signaling molecules. One of them being like YAPTAZ. I've talked about that on my channel before, but it's just some growth factors which cause your muscles to grow. So it's that's how it works in your skeletal muscle, which makes sense. If you apply tension and there's load involved, your muscles are going to adapt. So that's, I guess that's the simplest way I could put it.
The metabolic stress has any role at all?
No, not really. Mainly a role in repair. That would make the most sense. Metabolic stress in and of itself is not going to cause, like, you're talking about something that is, I guess, disrupting the system. That's one way to put it. So if you're damaging, you're causing metabolic stress, metabolite accumulation, maybe they have a slight growth effect, but is that growth effect actually causing growth or just helping with the repair process? So it's a pathway that's like next to each other, but it's divided by a thing of trees where they're not the same pathway still. They just look very similar.
If anything, they're probably it's again probably more so just like a byproduct of just again training hard and what's going to happen, right? More than anything, versus it being like, hey, a thing you want to chase. And again, metabolic stress being the best way I think of it is just again the pump and the burn and stuff like that. Would you say that's what you would call metabolic stress?
Niche term that people have been using. I've been seeing it a lot lately, and I find it so funny when people tell me this, but sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, that's exactly that. It's just inflammation, extra fluid. Think about it like if you ate more carbs one day and you started storing some extra water. That's pretty much what it's not really it's not a long-lasting adaptation. I would say like the thing that you should be aiming for the most is the adaptation of more muscle proteins, because the more myofibrillar proteins you have, the more muscle you have. But
Yep.
that's just generally speaking.
Yep, cool. As far as your training goes, again, you said you kind of have a background in powerlifting. Is that kind of what you train for now most of the time, or does that typically look like for you?
I grew up with like double jointed everything, and I ended up having bunions by the time I got into like my sophomore year, or specifically Taylor's bunions, which I had to get fixed, which was a pain in the ass. Flipped my rib and got surgery for that. So it's I've been all over the place. I don't think I'm traditionally powerlifting anymore, but I do want to get my bench back up. I am hoping that I can hit 200 before I have to get the other rib done. So hopefully that goes all well.
So is it hypertrophy style now, or is it just, hey, in terms of it's just working around injuries? And obviously, again, you're probably super busy with school and everything like that too. And I believe you do coaching as well. So, obviously have a lot of things going on. Is that kind of what your goal is now? Is just a little bit more hypertrophy related?
It's mainly more hypertrophy related. I also just find it a little bit more, I know this isn't a word, but funner. It really is. It's a lot, I guess, funner to, sorry, it's so much funner to be able to focus on all muscles rather than just three. I will say when it comes to powerlifting, I would say that all around a bodybuilder, like muscle for muscle, is probably going to be stronger than a powerlifter, because a powerlifter is primarily making adaptations neurally to specific movements, making those movements easier to do for them. And so even though they are adding on myofibrillar proteins, because there's literally no way other than that to get stronger, or at least other than like neural adaptations, but I think you understand what I'm saying there. It's like you're comparing somebody who focuses on everything to somebody who focuses on three movements and three movement patterns. The powerlifter will always beat out a bodybuilder in a hinge, but probably not on the bicep curl or a tricep extension. probably is going to be beaten out by any chest press, but probably not, I don't know, like some really niche movement like a quad extension. Even though they all train the same things, I've noticed it when I was powerlifting hardcore is it's really hard to focus on everything when you do really exhausting compounds like that.
Yeah, again, your volume goes down a bit. You're not able to focus on all those, like you said, like leg extension as much, and you don't have as much kind of recovery, as much many resources available to really push those extra kind of body parts there.
Yeah, I would say the accessory movements, even though they do help, it's like you can't make as fast progress as you would normally, especially if you're doing like deadlifts, which are literally just so fatiguing. It's like doing a burpee. It's not something that is easy to do. So that's the main reason why I decided to even though I focus on benching, I do benching and then other things. And I found that to be a lot more sustainable, at least for me. But yeah, that's my 2 cents.
With the powerlifting too, you mentioned like from overall hypertrophy standpoint, it's again, I would assuming we're talking about, hey, they're typically going to lift in like what the 1 to 5 rep range, 1 to 3 rep range is what we're talking about there. Again, like you said, you're going to add muscle, but it's just probably not the most productive and efficient way to get to that point. Now, again, there's probably going to be some outliers that can train that way and see really good muscle growth, but for most people, it's probably not going to be the most productive way to maximize hypertrophy.
I would partially disagree with that, just because there is a few pieces of literature that I've read up on that have changed my mind on how I look at volume. As far as volume goes, even though there is like something to be said about we don't know everything yet, and I'm not one to say that, oh yeah, I'm gonna write off, I guess, maximally recoverable volume, which is what a lot of people do preach. I'm not gonna completely write it off, as I'm never one to just write something off just because there's a little bit of evidence to suggest otherwise. That being said, from what I have seen, a lot of the evidence would show that I guess the higher volume amounts, so maybe plus 15 sets over per week, from what I've been reading up on, a lot of it is swelling, and we don't really know where that boundary is. So it could be lower, it could be higher. Typically, what I do is I just do the most amount of volume that keeps me progressing from week to week. And I focus on my progress rather than doing whatever I can, like the most amount that I can do, because then I end up needing a deload, and I hate deloading with a passion. That's my 2 cents. So I don't think that powerlifters necessarily get less growth because of the volume side of things. It's mainly because they're just trying to max out their leverages. And leverages themselves don't really improve rates of muscle growth. It's kind of like I think I mentioned it in a while back, but it's if you were to gain an inch around your arms, you wouldn't bend your arms as far because you couldn't. You just would have a larger arm overall. So you would be fooled into thinking that maybe at a slightly, maybe not 90 degree, but maybe at, I don't know. If you normally go, say, 45 degrees, you only go 90 degrees or something like that, where it's your arm is just thicker and your leverages are better and you seem stronger, but you're not really stronger. You're just your leverages.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. It's not really the volume. Again, it's just what you're trying to get out of the more powerlifting side of things. Again, you said you're just trying to lift as much weight as you can, and that don't necessarily. That's not necessarily the best way to go about building muscle. I think is what you were saying there with that. Yeah,
Exactly.
cool. What I wanted to bring you on today was around calorie surplus. I feel like this is something that has just been getting a lot more just airtime in the social media world, right? Around you have two camps of like, hey, you don't need a surplus, hey, you do need a surplus. And again, I feel like we're in line here. And I feel like some of the things I've been seeing you say on it are, again, things that I generally agree with. And so I guess where I want to start with this on is defining maintenance, right? This is something that I've seen you post a lot about is defining maintenance and the difference between maintenance cals and maintenance of body weight. So I think first, maybe we can start with defining maintenance and what that is in terms of, again, this is where it maybe gets confusing is, are we talking maintenance of like, you're just maintaining your progress, or are we talking maintenance of caloric intake? So maybe if we can define maintenance there.
Are you talking a maintenance like dietary maintenance calories, or are you talking maintenance in, I guess, body weight alone, maintenance in body composition? Because each one would be different.
So that's where I think people get the most stuck, right? Is like you said there, are we talking maintenance of body composition? And I think that's sometimes where people get confused. So as you said there, first we need to decipher, hey, when we say maintenance, what the hell are we talking about? Are we talking maintenance of, like you said, body composition, maintenance of caloric intake, or maintenance of body weight? Those are the three different ways you can go with it, correct? When you say that.
Yeah.
So let's talk maintenance of, I guess really I'm gonna throw that back to you. Where do you typically like to have this start out at? Hey, are we talking, do I want to start with maintenance of body weight, or do I want to talk about maintenance of your caloric intake? Maybe where those differ.
Yeah, so right now we only really have good a review on maintenance of body weight because it's just not something that's more readily studied. When you look at obesity literature, they mainly talk about maintenance of body weight or maintenance calories in this perspective of maintenance of body weight because the individuals aren't training. They aren't doing resistance training. They aren't exercising. They aren't building any lean mass. And something that I feel like is quite contradictory of at least a lot of the people who I've seen like on the opposition side is in one breath they'll say you need a surplus to build muscle. You if you eat at maintenance, you're only going to maintain body weight. But in their next breath they'll also say, "Oh yeah, you can also recomp and lose body fat while gaining muscle," which implies that muscle is weight. And if you were in quote unquote deficit and you were losing body fat, you could also be building muscle, which I guess in that sort of perspective, it makes less sense when you define maintenance as maintenance of body weight. So I guess I like to clear up that part first. And then I would go on to say that when we are talking about maintenance calories, it's important to acknowledge like the physiology behind it. There is not a single situation where if you are eating less than what your body is expending, that you will not lose body fat. If you're eating significantly less than what your body is burning, you will always lose body fat. So there's no scenario where that doesn't happen. And I think that's like an important thing to acknowledge. And our bodies also prioritize muscle mass over body fat, which is why we can maintain muscle while we lose body fat, gain it. And yeah, that being said, if you're in a really drastic deficit, it's the energy itself is going to be, I guess, you're restricted to how many calories you can eat in a day, which also restricts how much protein you eat in a day. And if muscle growth requires a specific amount of protein, you're obviously going to lose or you're not going to grow as much. But that's not necessarily a byproduct of the deficit. It's more of a byproduct of the protein intake. And I think that's like where a lot of people can get like in that muddy zone there.
So what it sounds like is we don't have much research on maintenance of body weight, but obviously in the studies that they've done, again, a lot of these people are not, like you said, weight training or anything like that. They're not really exercising. So that's going to impact their body composition, what that weight is made up of. Is that kind of where you're?
I would flip the two. So we don't have as much research on like maintenance of as a compositional thing. We have more research in terms of maintenance of body weight and like you're just trying to lose body fat because there is a lot of obesity research. And granted, it's very needed because there's an obesity epidemic. But that being said, we don't have as much literature on just people maintaining composition and slowly going up in muscle mass because that isn't really a concept that's well understood.
Yeah, that makes sense. You're not going to get a lot of studies done where it's like, hey, let's see how much muscle, like you said, it's just going to be hard to get studies like that done. So there's not going to be as much as there is in terms of, like you said, obesity research there. Okay. So if I'm understanding correctly, so I guess how would you define maintenance calories, maintenance of body weight then?
So I would define maintenance of body weight as per, I believe it's Stevens et al. 2006. If it's not, I can I guess correct it and give you the study, but I'm almost 100% sure it's that. So Stevens 2006, they defined maintenance of body weight as a 3 to 5% difference over a long period of time. So between that 3 to 5% range where you can go up and down in water weight and glycogen. And to be frank, if you did max out your glycogen stores, you would be outside of the 5% range, and a lot of people would, but that's like very difficult to do. So they say range between 3 to 5% over a long period of time, and that's maintenance of body weight. But it has nothing to do with whether you're in a caloric surplus deficit or eating quote unquote at maintenance, because it's not tied to a diet, it's just tied to body weight. Maintenance of your maintenance composition is a little more tied to body weight because now you're talking about, okay, now you need a specific amount of protein. You need a specific amount of calories to maintain your body fat stores. And all of those things are physiologically tied together in the sense that if you aren't eating enough protein and you're just eating enough calories overall, you are likely to lose muscle mass, which would cause your body weight to go down slightly. That being said, if you are gaining body fat because you're eating slightly above, now you're going to lose muscle, gain a little body fat. Maybe you stay with the same body weight. Is that maintenance of body weight? Yeah, it is. It's still within that 3 to 5% range, but it's not maintenance of body composition, which is what most people care about.
That makes a ton of sense. It's again, if you're just focused on the weight side of things, it's not really taking into account in terms of what that weight is made up of. And you could theoretically be maintaining that 3 to 5%, but body composition could be changing in a positive or a negative way, essentially, is what you're saying there with that.
Yeah, and maintenance of body composition can also be, in a sense, going up in body weight, in the sense that you can maintain the same relative body fat to body, like body muscle. And in a sense, that is almost the same exact thing energetically, because you aren't adding on additional body fat. You also aren't losing any body fat and going into that point where you are under like the healthy amount of body fat that you have for your body. So maintenance of body composition is a little more variable and isn't necessarily dependent on weight. It's more dependent on your composition.
Gotcha. That makes a ton of sense. Okay. And so I guess where does the maintenance calories come into play here? Where's there some confusion around that? Is there confusion around that? Where does that come into play here with all this?
Yeah, so if you're not exercising, then maintenance calories essentially equals maintenance of body weight because you're not exercising. If you eat at maintenance calories and you're not exercising at all, you're not doing anything to stimulate muscle growth, then you're pretty much going to maintain the same body composition no matter what you do. It's really not that difficult. That being said, if you throw exercise into the mix, exercise stimulates muscle growth. And I think anybody would argue that doing any sort of resistance training, especially if you're a new lifter, is going to stimulate muscle growth. It doesn't really matter like how good or optimal you train. It's newbie growth, newbie gains. It's something that I guess a lot of people talk about. When we're talking about maintenance calories in terms of body composition, it becomes a little bit more difficult because now you have to account for exercise, the recovery of exercise, and the recovery of exercise includes the processes of muscle growth. And if you grow muscle through that exercise, now you just added more tissue, and you now need to maintain that tissue if you want to quote unquote maintain your body composition. So it's a little more of a balancing act with body composition when compared to body weight maintenance. It only essentially will equal maintenance calories if you aren't exercising and you don't have that variable in there.
So I think what you're saying too is you could be at your maintenance calories, right? Whatever that is. And we can talk about what that looks like. And because you're exercising, you're doing the things that are putting your body in good position to build muscle. You may see your body weight change, right? Is that kind of what you're saying? Like it will probably trend up because you're adding some lean tissue onto your frame, right? Is that kind of where your head is at with it?
Yep. And given that you feel good for a period of time, especially if you are quote unquote skinny fat, you are eventually going to get to a point where you get really lean and you look amazing and you don't look quote unquote skinny fat anymore. You lost body fat and you gained muscle, but that is technically what a recomp is. So at some specific points, you're crossing out of maintenance calories into deficit, in almost like a deficit, because you're using body fat stores to build your muscle because you're not eating enough overall. And I would classify that as a deficit, not maintenance calories. I hope that makes sense. It's if you weren't accounting for exercise in your maintenance calories, that isn't really maintenance calories because you're not accounting for everything.
Yeah. Again, the big kind of lever there's the exercise side of things. And so I'm assuming too within this, like obviously what we do in that process is going to be super important. So what are some of those things that like, again, if somebody is around this maintenance cal, like what are going to be these things that are really going to help put your body in that best position to want to prioritize adding tissue?
So I'll just give my practical recommendations because they're the simplest thing on the planet, a lot simpler than what I was just talking about. So practical recommendations is make sure you're eating at least 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. Make sure you're eating overall enough calories that you don't feel starving all the time and you are maintaining around the same body weight from over the course of a 2-week period. So if you jump up like 5 pounds after 1 week, you're probably not eating a good amount of calories and you should lower it. Likewise, if you lose 5 pounds, you should probably increase calories. So just relatively maintaining around your body weight over the course of 2 weeks. Same thing goes for body composition because you're not going to gain a pound of muscle in 1 week. I think
Unfortunately.
unfortunately. Because muscle growth it tends to be slow. Over 2 weeks, if you don't notice your body composition or weight changing super drastically, you're probably in a good place. So eat enough calories overall that your body composition and body weight are not drastically changing. Enough protein that you are able to build muscle, so 1 gram per pound of body weight. Make sure you're progressing in the gym. So if your lifts are going up somewhat, whether you're increasing the amount of repetitions you're doing, the amount of weight you're doing, if the way that you feel good, if like maybe one day your set looks really slow and the next day your set looks really fast and it's super easy, that's fantastic. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's like my practical recommendations. If you
No, I love it.
progress, eat protein and eat enough overall, there's nothing that would stop you from building muscle.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's great. One thing I think I've heard you talk about too is, and this is something I really preach, especially when we're talking, you're in this position here where, again, we're trying to limit fat gain in the process is meal timing, right? Especially around your workouts. How big a role do you think that plays for some people?
So, especially if you're waking up and going to the gym, eat food. Like, generally speaking, you shouldn't have an 8-hour fast before your workouts. So, my advice is as long as you aren't fasting for over 5 hours, then like you're pretty much good to go and you don't really need to eat. But if you're fasting for 5+ hours, you should eat food. Don't just like fast and then go to the gym. That's a horrible way to feel good in the gym, which is like how you make progress. If you're not feeling good, you're not gonna perform well.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. You need to feel good in the process. I think that's something that's often overlooked here too. Like you said, you can almost just use your own kind of biofeedback in terms of how you feel, making sure you're energized and feel good. And like you said, you're not overly hungry and stuff like that. That can be super helpful. So big picture then, where does a lot of the disagreement come from? Because I think that's a good place to take this conversation. I still have a lot of questions I want to ask around all this, but like where do you feel like the most common kind of disagreement comes from with all this?
I think the most common disagreements initially came from me misspeaking because I was trying to simplify it down and I accidentally simplified it down too much. And
Mm.
I pretty much contradicted myself, which I honestly feel really bad for. But like, I tried to explain it and then everybody just jumped on me and was like, no, you were wrong and you're not admitting it. I'm like, I'm not okay. But that. I think it was mainly from that contradiction, but other aside from that contradiction, the other part is people want to they're so focused on the scale, especially guys that I've noticed, my clients. I love my clients to death, but they're so focused on gaining weight. And it's important to understand that weight in the same way that when you're losing body weight, you shouldn't focus on the scale too much if you're also doing resistance training because it is going to be slower if you're gaining muscle as well. Same thing goes for gaining muscle. Like it is still very slow. So you shouldn't be focusing on the scale weight when it can fluctuate 10 pounds after a larger meal or more carbs. I think that's an important thing to understand. Also, there have been studies that have shown that your muscles can actually swell, I believe it's up to 96 hours after exercise. So if you had one particularly hard training session and your muscles swelled quite a bit, you might be noticing some water weight too. So I guess it's like an unnecessary focus on the scale weight when you don't need to.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with really everything you said there. I didn't hear the contradiction, so I didn't know what that was specifically. But as far as the scale weight side of things go, I totally agree with you there on that. It's funny because it's like you called out men in particular, and I completely agree. And I've been there myself where just was so much focus on just gaining the weight on the scale, right? Like for me, it was to the point to where it was like every time I weighed in, I had to see it go up, and I would weigh in at certain times to just see it artificially go up. And it's okay, looking back, that was stupid, right? But then from for women, I feel like it's the opposite, where then they maybe get themselves into a little bit too much trouble here, and it's the other they focus on it the other way a little bit too much. And we can talk about sex differences in terms of maybe what your recommendations are there, but I agree with you 100%. I think it ends up being this thing where people end up overly focusing on just pushing their scale weight up. And as you mentioned earlier, muscle growth is just a slow process, unfortunately. Like we think that if we gain 15 pounds in 5 months, it's all muscle, but that's probably not the case. And I feel like even a little bit of muscle, whether it be 1 to 5 pounds in a period of time, is going to make a massive difference in terms of how much what it looks like on your body. So I think what you're saying is your big thing is we just want to be careful with like constantly feeling like we need to push our scale weight up in order to build muscle.
Yeah, and I feel like there's a lot of pushback on that because especially guys want to see the scale weight go up really fast. I don't see it with a lot of my female clients. In fact, they tend to prefer the quote unquote main gaining method because you see more consistent progress, one, and you also don't need to go through cycles of cutting, which honestly suck. If anybody's gone through a cut, it's never a fun process. It's not fun restricting yourself. That's the reason why I like the maintenance method is because you always feel the same. You always feel good. You don't really feel overfull. You never feel starving. You never feel like the low energy of a deficit, which is really nice. And that's why I promote it. But I feel like there's also that part of, oh, it's too good to be true. You need to put yourself through pain. And that's like the fitness industry mentality of you got to put yourself through hardship and pain and suffering to get to where you want to be, but you really don't have to. And then on top of that, shoot, what was I gonna say? There was one part that you said, oh yeah, the contradiction. It was because I said it was eat at quote unquote maintenance calories and then put into a 200 to 100 calorie quote unquote surplus, but it's
Which
not
like
surplus if you're just replacing what you're doing for exercise. So My recommendation typically, or at least it started off a little bit more complicated and then I simplified it down over time, was use a calorie calculator, estimate your calories, and then, or estimate your calories with like how much you work and are active throughout the day. So neat. And then add on your exercise activity thermogenesis after that, which would be approximately 100 to 200 calories depending on body size. And I don't think that's like necessarily any different from what I was also recommending, which is eat a regular amount of maintenance calories and just make sure that you're fueling yourself well and make sure your body composition isn't drastically changing. But I could have said it differently. So that's just like retrospect.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think too, maybe where it, again, this comes back to what we initially talked about with scale weight. And you're not saying that your scale weight should be the exact same. It's like you specifically said, hey, over time, you may slightly see it trend up over time as well too. And I think people also get themselves caught up in that, as like they think that, again, it's going to stay the exact same, but you may see it slightly trend up over time because of the fact that you're putting on muscle there as well too, right?
Oh yeah, and actually you will definitely see it trend up, especially if you are making progress in the gym. If you are making progress in the gym consistently, that is almost a telltale sign that you are gaining myofibrillar proteins because there is almost no way, especially if you're doing the same movement over and over again, that you are getting consistently stronger over a period of time and you aren't gaining any muscle. I don't like that makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
You're never gonna find a bodybuilder that when they first started, their bicep curl is weaker than when they ended off. So at almost any time when you're looking over a really long period of time, when neural adaptations maybe are more closer to being like, I guess, more I guess advanced, where you're making less crazy adaptations neurally, that increase in strength is going to be a really big principal component of that is going to be from growing muscle. Again, no bodybuilder has gotten weaker in a bicep curl from when they first started. So I think that's something important to note. And you'll also notice that as you gain muscle, the amount of muscle that you gain will slow down over time. So newbies, maybe they gain 5 to 10 pounds in like their first couple months of training. I don't know. And then compare that to an advanced lifter. Maybe they start off by gaining 1 pound a month, but that slowly goes down over a period of time because it's unrealistic to think that an advanced lifter is gaining 20 pounds of muscle every single year as an advanced lifter. Like even I like do not do that. And I think it's unrealistic to expect people to gain a full pound of muscle over a specific period of time. And if you just let it happen in the sense that you're progressing in the gym, I don't see any harm of not focusing on the scale.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you say that, again, your approach on this is you're not, the big thing that you're looking out for here is just basically avoiding unnecessary fat gain that you don't need to gain. And then so that way the pro of this too is now you also don't have to do these cutting cycles as often, and you almost can spend more time here at this phase long term. Would you say that kind of sums up your kind of thought process on all this in general?
Yep, pretty much.
And so I guess with that, is there any particular case where you would be like, hey, we purposely need to push your scale weight up? Or is it, hey, just across the board, I wouldn't do this? Or is it context dependent? Because I also feel like this is where this kind of can get lost at times too. It's very context dependent too, right? It's if a guy's 115 pounds and he wants to build muscle, it's okay, hey, we're not going to be able to keep you at 115, right? You're going to have to gain weight at some point, right? So what maybe fill in the audience around that as well too in terms of the context dependency of it.
Yeah, so like pretty much every single video I've made on this, the biggest caveat that I've said is if you're at a healthy body fat percentage. If you're not at a healthy body fat, why are you trying to maintain your body fat? That's like telling somebody who is diagnosed with obesity, hey, you're diagnosed with obesity, maintain your body fat and build muscle. Like that makes no sense. Same thing goes for if you're under fat. So if you're under fat, you should gain fat. And it's a healthy amount. When you are eating at maintenance and you aren't gaining that much body fat, you still are gaining a little bit of quote unquote body fat respectively to your muscle over time. Physiologically, it doesn't make a difference because you're not gaining excess body fat, so you're not experiencing slight decreases in insulin sensitivity. You're not experiencing any sort of like fat cell hyperplasia or fat cell hypertrophy to a significant extent. It's mainly just you're replenishing your fat stores over time to maintain like the respective amount to your muscle tissue, which is a net positive on your health. It is important to replenish your body fat stores and to maintain your relative body composition. Like you want to maintain your body composition, not change it over time. So that's the main caveat it.
Yeah. So again, like you said, we're looking at healthy body weight, body fats here as well too. And so I'd assume that obviously we have two ends of the spectrum here. We have that person, like we said, super, maybe they're super lean or whatever it may be. They're on the low end side of things. For them, hey, you probably want to get to healthy body fat levels, and that's going to involve you pushing your weight up. And then we have people on the other side too. And I would imagine this is where all this kind of comes in. This is where I see this misapplied, especially in men overall, is they're on the higher end of the body fat level and they think that they need to gain weight to build muscle. And I feel like that's where things really can go haywire, again, from a body composition perspective there. Is that something that you would agree with, or do you have any? Yeah.
So you're saying like if they're at like an unhealthy body fat percentage that you don't want to push the scale weight too far up or down, right?
If they're at the high end, that would be a context dependent case where you're like, okay, we're definitely not going to try and be in a surplus here at this point, right? That would be more of a reason to be like, hey, definitely your maintenance, but we may even be in a deficit or a slight deficit, and that in turn is going to help you. That's going to put you in a better position to maybe even add a little bit of muscle if you're nailing all the things that we talked about earlier as well too.
Yeah, so usually one of the first questions I'll ask anybody who I work with is, hey, have you ever been at a body fat percentage that you really like and were comfortable with? And usually if they have been in like fitness for a while, they'll say yes. And I'll be like, okay, how lean were you? Could you send me some pictures? And then we'll usually try to work back down or back up to that body fat percentage. And then we can maintain from there. I try to work with people's like where they're comfortable at, work with people where they're at, not try to force them to be somewhere else. So I think that's like the most important thing is like making sure that they are at a healthy body fat. So if they are unhealthy, get them back down or get them back up. And if they want to be at a more comfortable body fat, then get them back down or back up. But once they're there, there's no reason to like artificially change their body fat percentage for no good reason.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. What would you consider quote unquote healthy body fat percentages?
I would say between like it for men it's between 8 and 15, I believe. For women, it's between 15 and 25 or something like that. But really, it can be anywhere in between there. So if somebody is at 8% and they feel like dog shit, I'll push them back up to 10% maybe. But it really just depends. But you also, if you feel good at 12 and you also feel good at 15, but you look leaner at 12 and you like it, then I'll push them back down to 12. Because it's if you feel good at both, why would you torture yourself with that? So it's, yeah, all context, very personalized and individual.
One thing that I've changed, like my approach to this surplus now in gaining phases, is again, like you said, getting them to a healthy body fat percentage, getting in that range. And again, that may require like a short period of time of bringing your body weight up slightly to get there. But again, as long as you're feeling good and you're in that range, you don't necessarily need to really be focused on pushing your scale weight up at that time anymore. And I guess really the next question would be, okay, so say somebody is above those ranges and they are, hey, I need to be in a surplus to build muscle. What are the downsides of continuing to push that up and seeing your body fat percentage trend up past these levels?
Even though exercise can counteract insulin resistance, you can't just expect your body to compensate for every crappy thing you do to it. So especially if you are somebody who loves saturated fat and cholesterol and you love eating it, it's probably not the most cardiometabolic healthy thing to do to continue to push up on the body fat percentage, especially considering that intramuscular fat is one of the primary causes of insulin resistance. And obesity does reduce muscle quality and metabolism, regardless of whether or not the person is exercising or not. You're still going to decrease the quality, even if it's by a little bit. And to me, if I'm trying to optimize the process, why would I want to decrease the quality of my muscle, the byproduct of doing so? Like, that makes zero sense to me. Even if it's like marginal and the person isn't even quote unquote classifiable as insulin resistant, I don't see a point in it. So there's no benefit to it. There's no reason to do it. And then on top of that, you don't really know how that person's metabolism or fat genetics work. So I spoke about this once before, but fat cell hypertrophy and hyperplasia, we don't know if somebody is predisposed for obesity on that end either, in the sense that when they do try to lose body fat again, is it going to be really hard for them or really easy? And you can't really know until you get there. And when you get there, now you're putting them in that uncomfortable situation where, oh, now I have a lot of trouble like losing that body fat. And I think we saw that with Dr. Mike Israetel a little bit when he like tried to cut back down and he bulked up too hard. He even said it himself. He bulked up too hard and he found it really difficult to cut back down. And I think it's a shame that people get themselves into those scenarios and it can be avoided if they just don't do it in the first place.
So does this change for men versus women, or would you say it's the same across the board there?
I would say that slightly more women may want to make sure that they abide by this just because PCOS is affects around 10% of women. We don't fully understand how endometriosis works, and all of that combined can impair a really large portion of your month, which makes it very difficult to not only lose weight because metabolic issues, but also in general makes it difficult to feel good. So you want to feel as consistent as possible as a female. And I've noticed with my female clients that the more consistent you feel, the better progress you make. And if you are like, I guess like our hormone cycle is all over the place. So like hormones are never balanced. So like, why would I want to further make my life more difficult by not only being on a monthly cycle, but now like a 5 month cycle where I'm going through like body fat cycles too? It just overcomplicates things. For men, I would say if you find it difficult to lose weight and you've lost weight before, probably don't bulk and cut. And if you can mean gain, I would do it. If you enjoy bulking and cutting because you just don't care about structuring your diet super, I never understood why people thought that it was more difficult to structure a maintenance diet, because I feel like you have to take more care to structure your bulk and cut more precisely so you're not overshooting or undershooting. But either which ways, if you find bulking and cutting to be quote unquote easier, or you want to do it for whatever reason, be my guest. It's a little less risky because you don't have as many variables, but it still is like, why would you do it to yourself? There's no extra benefit. It's just unnecessary to me.
Yeah, and I wonder, do you think you say these bulk and cut cycles? So again, we're talking the like really drastic, hey, you're pushing your weight up and we're really pushing it down. But again, I think if you go with this kind of strategy that we're talking about here, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this. This is just my thought on it. I don't see any downside of dipping into a deficit for a short period of time every once in a while. But the good thing here with this is by taking this approach, that becomes something that you very rarely feel like you need to do. But
Yeah.
again, I would say there's also nothing wrong with sometimes, again, like we're talking very short period of time here, doing that every 1 to 2 years or something along the lines there with them.
Yeah, and I've spoken about it with like bodybuilders too. Like I don't almost never see bodybuilders cutting in the middle of their off season. And I think that goes to show that they aren't necessarily doing the bulk cut cycles to build muscle. They're doing it because they compete, meaning they cut down to really low body fat percentages that are unhealthy and have to bulk back up to healthy body fat percentages. But with any smart bodybuilder, you're never going to see them cutting in their off season. So they aren't bulking up so far that they are also cutting multiple times throughout their off season, or they're doing it on more of a purposeful basis, when in reality they're going up to healthy body fats and coming back right back down to an unhealthy one. So if you want to cut back down for a photo shoot, going to the beach, like I don't see a problem with that, but you don't need to artificially do it for no good reason.
Yeah, because for me, for example, this is where in this current gaining phase, this is where I've taken this approach now, and I haven't had to be in a deficit since November of 2023. So we're coming on almost a year and a half here. And like in the past, it would be like, hey, I felt 6 months in, I would need to go into at least a small cut. And so it's been nice to not have to worry about doing that. And that's just a more anecdotal experience there. We're taking this approach of seeing my body weight slowly trend up over time versus, hey, how I used to do it every single week, or again over a 1 to 2 3 week span. Like, hey, I needed to see my weight trend up, and if it wasn't, hey, let's eat a little bit more calories. And also doing that the entire gaining phase, right? And again, it just led to me having to wanting to cut more often there. So again, just an anecdotal experience that I've experienced with this.
I'm not gonna lie, it's been the same thing with me. I've been main gaining for approximately I used to main gain, and I actually got most of my strength through main gaining because I wanted to stay in a weight class. That being said, after I believe the first 2 years of lifting, I ended up doing a bulk and cut cycle regrettably because it sucked. And I found it really difficult to lose weight because I have PCOS. After I lost the weight, I decided that I wanted to main gain once I was finished with all my surgeries. I've been main gaining for approximately a month now, and I've almost increased all of my lifts by 10 pounds, which is pretty nice. Most of it is muscle memory, but it's still pretty cool that you can still make progress. It feels more consistent. It's less painful. Like you don't need to pay attention as much to your diet because if you have one day where you have a cheat meal, it's not a big deal.
Yeah. And again, I think the key thing that we need to stress here is, again, we want to check in on how we're feeling, right, in this process. I could totally see where people end up under eating with this approach if they're not careful with it. So you still want to make sure you're eating enough, right? Because I feel like people automatically assume that when we say this, we're like, oh, under eat, but it's no, we still want to make sure we're eating enough. You just we don't want to get into this kind of dreamer bulk scenario here with this. To go back to women real quick, you kind of mentioned with them, you would almost watch this a little bit more. And I wonder too, if part of it has to do with, so yes, you mentioned that from a metabolic health standpoint, if we start to push these body fats too high, you could run into some issues with the menstrual cycle. You said PCOS, stuff like that. But is this also the case too that women just, I don't know, I just feel like maybe women already generally like they need more body fat, right? They have more essential levels of body fat. So it's like you already have that extra energy on your body, right? Is that kind of where you're going with that?
Oh, when I was talking about PCOS, I was talking genetics. So, like, genetically, like PCOS and endometriosis can be a problem, which can make it really hard to lose weight. Being in a cutting and bulking cycle is already really stressful and difficult to do. So, why would you add that on to an already stressful menstrual cycle? So, it's like you already have a cycle that's embedded in your life and is something that is a necessary thing. So, why would you add on an extra one? It just doesn't make sense. That being said, like, that too. If you have a little bit more body fat to play around with, it's a little easier to stay in a main gaining phase and feel fine. And I guess another thing when it comes to the whole like structure of it is that like eating disorders are really common in the fitness industry. And it's a lot easier to fall into the eating disorder mentality when you're constantly watching your calories to make sure that, oh yeah, are you overshooting your bulk? Are you undershooting your cut? Are you going too far to this, to that? And it's a lot less stressful when you can say, okay, I'm maintaining my body composition. If I want to go out and have a meal, I can do it. And I don't really need to worry about it because I'm just eating at maintenance. And my body weight isn't going to go up like 5 pounds after one meal. So that's like the main reason why I like it, is because it's less eating disorder promoting and it's a friendlier diet, easier to maintain on, because it's literally just eating at maintenance and eating to feel good. If you're eating to feel good, you're fueling your body.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, I totally agree. I just think that as you continue to gain more and more body fat, it's like you already talked about there. It's like you're going to have issues from a metabolic health standpoint, which is going to probably not make, it's going to make the muscle building process a lot tougher there. So I guess at the end of the day, again, this could be another kind of thing that people bring up. If we're looking at, hey, somebody who is, again, theoretically at their maintenance energy balance, again, whatever that is, versus somebody who is in a small surplus, do you think that the person in the small surplus would, if again everything's the same, they would build muscle a little bit quicker than somebody?
No, given that everything else is the same, they feel good. They're eating enough protein. They're not fasting before their workouts, because that's something I've noticed. I don't know why people do it, but the second you tell them to eat at maintenance, they fast before their workouts. I'm like, why are you doing that? But I guess it's like something in the fitness industry with restricting. Like when you start restricting calories, they have this mentality of, oh, now I'm like restricting and I can't eat as much. But the reality is that it's more just like a flexible diet thing. That being said, I don't think that you would, especially if you are. There was this one study that was discussing like flexible versus rigid dieting, and this was in a caloric deficit. Both groups gained muscle, so it's clear that you can still gain muscle when you are in a deficit, and this was in trained individuals. So given all things that are equal, you feel good, you're making progress, you're eating enough protein, eating enough like energy overall, there shouldn't be any difference.
Yeah. And is that more based off like you feel like anecdotal, or would you say there is actual, like again, you just hit on, hey, this study here where it says you can build muscle in a deficit even as a trained lifter. Again, so long as I think again where this all gets lost is the inputs are super important. What you do, you got to set yourself up to build muscle. You can't just, again, I think people focus too much on just the energy balance side of things when your actual inputs are the most important. But is any of that based, is there any research to back that up? I'm someone that like, I don't think we need to, I think sometimes we over rely on it, but I'm just curious, is there anything that says, because I know there was it the Garth study? And again, I'd be curious to hear more about this, where they did, and again, I could be wrong here on this, so correct me if I'm wrong, but they did gain more weight, but they gained more body fat in the process, but they had a little bit more muscle. Now, was that all muscle, or what are your thoughts on that?
You want me to show you some of the studies? Because I do have some of them like just linked. And I don't mind sharing my screen if you don't mind. Sure. Alrighty. So first one I'll show you is Eric Helms. That one got a lot of.
Let me make sure that can you share, or do you?
Let's see.
Here we go.
I'll send request.
There you go.
Okay. And so the first one is actually, you know what? I'll start off with the Garth one because you just mentioned it. And I have the study up. So Garth, I believe, what was it? Garth et al. Surplus, I remember, in elite athletes, right?
Yeah, I know it was in athletes.
Yeah.
And I know too with that, and again, I'm sure you're gonna hit on this. I think their like training was like I don't know. I could be, I don't know if they were like actually training for hypertrophy in it or whatever, but
So I'm just going to quickly sign in here. So also, if you ever have a study that you want to check out, I am happy to give you the study because I have access to all of the full literature. And that's how I do all of my studying for the actual videos I make. So I'm just gonna share this real quick. Screens, there we go. So I believe it is this one, 2003, from what I remember. So let's see here if it'll load. Here we go. So in this study, there was, if we scroll down here, and let me just move this over. So this was the difference in lean body mass between the two groups. Now, I will say that if you are talking about a surplus, both groups were in a surplus, first of all. And if you are in a very extreme surplus when you're gaining this crazy amount of body fat, you are going to expect some water weight with your lean mass, which also every, I believe, gram of glycogen comes with a couple grams of water. So you're gaining a considerable amount of muscle mass.
yep.
And that is probably what is going on here, especially considering this giant increase in fat mass. That being said, there was only really a 1% difference in lean mass. So that makes it even more likely that it's not actually real lean mass, but rather glycogen and water. And I don't think anybody is going to argue that because both groups are in a surplus and it's a 1% change that was so non-significant that even the authors down here, I believe they actually addressed it where they say, or was it 500 calories? I remember the actual line. Yeah. The finding that athletes in the NCG did not accomplish even greater gains in total lean body mass despite an energy surplus corresponding to approximately 500 calories may have several explanations, and then they go into some of that explanations there as well, where it was not sport specific, so probably a little more inflammation, more water retention, things like that. That being said, that's the Garth study. Then there was the Eric Helm study, which I like a lot. Now, some people will cherry pick this study and they will say, oh, yeah, but in the biceps group, the high surplus group gained more than the maintenance group. Only problem is that the maintenance actually had higher increases in muscle thickness compared to the slight surplus group, as you can see. So this is the moderate or slight surplus group. This is the maintenance group, and this is the high surplus group for the biceps growth. As you can see, taken all together, there's some groups where the maintenance outperforms slight, some groups where I guess the slight outperforms the high. So it's very all over the place. And at the end of the day, they didn't really find any difference between the muscle thickness gains here. But as you can see, maintenance outperforms slight, but high outperforms maintenance. And that's usually what people will say. Now, there's not a significant difference in muscle growth, but there was a significant difference in skin fold size. Maintenance basically gained no body fat. The high surplus group gained a significant amount of body fat, and then the slight surplus group gained a little bit less, but still gained a significant amount of body fat. So clearly they were in a surplus, and clearly there was not really a really big difference. And then finally, I believe there's one other study that people like to cite, and that's the Rosnick study. Have you heard of it?
I've heard the name. I don't know if I'm super familiar with the actual study.
So this one was cited actually, I believe, in Jeff's video on bulking.
Jeff Nippard.
Yeah, I ended up having a conversation with him because I strongly disagreed with the study. But you'll see why, and I think you would also agree when I say this. Let's see, CHO Pro. I don't know why I can't find it. There we go.
You got it.
Yeah, so there's this study, which is free on ResearchGate. So this study didn't even actually control for calorie surplus or maintenance because that's not what they were looking at. They were looking at the effects of a carbohydrate and protein and carbohydrate supplement, which was my first criticism. Usually, if you are trying to test for something, you want the test to be actually for what you're looking at.
Right.
Then when you look at the actual calorie intake, so according to, I believe, the actual calories here, it would be a 2010 calorie for the carbohydrate and protein, and I believe it was 2020 calorie for the carbohydrate only. Since protein, the thermic effect of food is higher, I would consider the carbohydrate and protein group to be eating the slight surplus and the carbohydrate group to eating the high surplus. Now, they didn't have a significant difference in total calories consumed per day. That being said, the control group did eat quite a bit more than the other two groups, and that's probably due to the supplement. They just weren't as hungry. That being said, if you look over here, two of the groups looked like they were in a deficit, and another group looked like they were at maintenance, based on the fat mass alone. So it's an interesting study, but I wouldn't say that it represents the question that we're trying to ask. And because of the body fat, the lack of results in the fat mass gain or loss, that it's not really reliable in the sense that it disagrees with pretty much every single overfeeding study that we have on body fat.
Sorry, so real quick. So what is this study? What is this link toward? You're saying that because the fat mass here in this graph here did not increase, that essentially they were
They
not in a surplus. Is that kind of what you're saying there with that, I think, right?
Yeah, so physiologically, they would not be in a surplus because if the argument is that you need to be in a high enough surplus that you are gaining a noticeable amount of body fat to augment the muscle growth process, by that logic, this would have to show that body fat is being accrued. And it's so non-significant that in the slight surplus group, which actually grew technically the most compared to the other two groups, they lost a non-significant amount of body fat but gained more muscle. That makes almost no sense. So just based off of that, like when you're looking at this study specifically, it disagrees with the vast majority of overfeeding literature that we do have, which shows that when you overfeed somebody, they gain body fat. These people were clearly not overfed, or at least they were not overfed to the extent that would be evidence for the claim that bulking and cutting is necessary or augments muscle growth. So it doesn't really apply to the actual question.
And so I'm assuming the other side of it, people will say they gained weight, therefore they're in a surplus. So in this surplus, they gained all muscle, which in turn would lead to somebody thinking that, hey, a surplus is going to build more muscle. Is that what I'm understanding on the other side of the coin in terms of the other argument up on this?
I think so. And I think that's like a little bit of a strange argument to make when you're talking about bulking and cutting, because I don't think anybody is ever saying that, oh, you should just bulk and just bulk because that's going to help build only muscle. Like it always comes with cutting. So if they're not gaining body fat, then what's the purpose of cutting, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So that's my 2 cents on, I guess, some of the literature. I have other literature that I've looked at, but the vast majority of it is so non-significantly different that it's just like, why are we saying that a surplus is beneficial if it's so non-significant to the point where even the authors are saying it?
Yeah. No, it's super interesting. And I feel like at the end of the day, I feel like it's just, again, I think when it comes back to it, I think what we're trying to say here is it needs to be less about the scale weight and again more about your inputs with all this stuff. And I think again, this whole bulking and cutting ends up leading people to overly focus on scale weight, which in turn doesn't really help body composition overall, which ultimately is what we want, right? That's what we want to improve is our body composition, not who cares what the weight is.
Yep, exactly. And that's what everybody says to people when they start off in the gym is stop focusing on the scale weight because the scale weight doesn't matter if you're gaining muscle. So why does it suddenly change when the person is underweight?
Yeah.
Or underweight but not under fat? So like somebody who's, I guess, skinny fat. Why does that suddenly change? That doesn't make sense to me.
So, sorry, why does what not change? I think I maybe had just missed that part of it.
Oh, like I don't understand why it suddenly changes when people say, oh yeah, scale weight doesn't matter. Scale weight doesn't matter to new people who are just introduced to the gym, who maybe they're overweight and they need to lose body fat. But then the second you see somebody who is skinny fat, who is still slightly overweight, but to be fair, they just really need to gain muscle. When somebody says, like, to them, oh, now you have to bulk. Now you
I
have
see.
so why does it suddenly change for them? At the end of the day, you're telling other people to not care about the scale. So we should be more consistent with, I guess, our recommendations. And I think that fitness could use a little bit more consistency.
Yeah, and I think in probably context too, right? I definitely think
Yeah.
context is super key in that skinny fat situation here. And we'll wrap this up here with this, but in that situation, what you're saying there is if somebody is skinny fat, again, they aren't necessarily overweight, but they have high body fat compared to what their weight is. Again, you're saying in that situation, a lot of people will be like, hey, gain weight. When really the key is let's get the inputs dialed in and just again make sure you're eating enough, not too much, but enough at that point.
Yeah, I would say it also depends on how skinny and how fat the person is.
Yeah.
Somebody is really like more fat than skinny, I would probably advise a deficit. But if they are a little more skinny than they are fat, I would probably just put them at maintenance and say, hey, make sure that you're eating enough, make sure you feel good in the gym, make sure you're making enough progress, and you'll be okay. So yeah, again, very
Context dependent. Yep.
yeah.
Cool. No, this was super helpful. I guess then to just wrap it all up, what would you say would be like the main takeaways of our conversation today?
Make sure you get enough protein. Don't worry too much about the scale weight. Make sure you're making progress in the gym. And overall, just make sure you feel good and like that you're not starving or like overfull.
I love it. Cool. Is there anything else in terms of that maybe I didn't ask you or that we didn't hit on that you want to go over with this topic, or something that, again, when you have these conversations, people will commonly bring up?
Not necessarily. You touched on pretty much all of the things that people talk about usually. It's pretty much the same things. And then usually it's just the other people who are like the whataboutism, where it's like, what about this scenario? What about this? I think we touched on the major hot button issues.
Yeah. And again, I think on my end of it, my takeaway too is, again, it's very context dependent, but we just want to make sure we get away from just focusing on the scale and like just gaining unnecessary fat gain really at the end of the day. And that's usually, I feel like, what happens when we really focus on just scale weight in these extreme bulking and cutting cycles in there. So
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think yeah.
cool. Again, really appreciate your time. This was a fun conversation to really dive into the nitty gritty here. Before I let you go, where anything coming out on your end here soon, and then where can the audience find you?
You can find me at Scientific Snitch on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. And I'll probably make a couple like shorts or something given like permission. So that would be fun to collaborate. So that's about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Yeah. And again, love to have you on, especially as more research around this topic and just any interesting stuff comes out. So again, really appreciate your time, Ella, and we'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.